Hello, I'm Andrew.
Hello, I'm Lisa.
Welcome to episode 67 of...
Round the Archives.
Well, it's been a while, hasn't it?
It has. We're back.
Yes. It's like I've been hibernating, isn't it? Like the Blue Peter tortoise.
Okay.
But now I've emerged from my box.
All right. Did they forget to wake you up?
Well, I don't think you drilled enough air rolls, to be honest.
Okay.
I think that straw needs changing as well.
Okay.
Anyway, let's get a shift on, shall we?
Mm-hmm.
Lots to pack in again.
Yeah.
So here's Michael Seeley talking about...
Bulman.
Right, are we ready, studio? Let's begin. Several years ago, when I fancied writing another biography, I had two actors in mind. Now, you can hear me talk about Ian Cuthbertson in a recent edition where I waxed lyrical about Sutherland's Law. But the other was the fantastic and distinctive actor Don Henderson. Now, for me, a biography of the Don would also have had to have been a biography of Bulman, the fantastic and distinctive copper and later detective that time should not forget. He appeared in 3 series over 10 years. The XYY Man, where he was the protagonist against a recidivist thief called Spider Scott. Strangers, where he headed a team of intercity detectives. And finally, his own series, where he was now a private detective, outside of the system that now treated him with suspicion and derision. Few coppers had such longevity before the monster that was the Bill came around. The BBC's Barlow and Watts, Sergeant Cork and Lockhart from No Hiding Place spring to mind. James Ellis from Z-Cars was in it for a couple of decades, wasn't he? However, Bulman's investigations were very different experiences from your usual police fare. I have loved Bulman since I first watched an episode of his final spin-off series in 1984, the one where Dirty Lord Denning gets offed, following a botched robbery where he falls into the hands of armed police and tries to hold our George hostage. A few days later, I spotted a Bulman TV tie-in book in Jarrold's, which is Norwich's cheaper version of Harrods. The book was, I later discovered, the second one, but I nabbed it all the same and devoured it. Written by Robert Holdstock, no less. And that episode, The Name of the Game, was one of the adaptations. 1984 was the year in which the Bill began, going for full authenticity and realism and naturalism in acting and setting. The glare of videotape on location, which put me off immediately. I didn't want reality in my TV shows. Bulman was on film, and realism and naturalism was not the name of the game. In fact, you could argue that had always been the case of our George, whichever series he was in. Don Henderson was not the type of character actor who could comfortably slip and slide between accents and types of character. Don pops up in an episode of Softly Softly with an imposed accent, and it just does not compute when you watch it. That's not our Don. He usually played a variation of the same character type, either a goodie or a baddie. A brooding presence, softly spoken, which was more down to the throat cancer which affected him in later years. He could not easily shout, and I remember when he made a guest appearance as a murdering general in The New Statesman in the 1990s, it was getting worse. However, he is a consummate actor who proves that less is indeed more. I remember catching an edition of Crossroads as a DVD extra for a Strangers Network release, where he is in total command of his performance in a series with famously minuscule rehearsal time, and one of the other actors was merrily fluffing his way through the part, a bit like me right now. An ex-copper himself, the story goes that he auditioned for the Royal Shakespeare Company in his beloved Stratford-upon-Avon for a bet and got in. Television discovered and loved him, for he had that distinctive profile and presence, a face you wouldn't argue with. You may have seen him as a regular in Warship, where he played Master-at-Arms Frank Heron, and in the first series he had some dominant episodes. Or perhaps you saw him in Ripping Yarns as a randy sergeant major who tried to help Michael Palin cross the Andes by frog, but ran off to get married instead. Doctor Who, take no prisoners, kill them all, as I frequently say first thing in the morning, and Star Wars fans will claim him for the parts he played in their favourite franchise. Ugh, horrible word. Bulman came to him in 1976 when Kenneth Royce's XYY Man novels were adapted by Granada. Bulman was a rough, crude detective sergeant, apparently the rank that Don Henderson himself reached, holding typical London attitudes well accompanied by his long-suffering and sceptical but frequently amused sidekick, Willis. Bulman had it in for the eponymous anti-hero of the piece, the XYY Man himself, Spider Scott, a habitual thief and housebreaker. That his criminality was informed by his possessing the extra Y chromosome was a piece of rubbish science that had been junked a long time ago. Nature, environment versus hereditary. Bulman was always out to nail Scott if their paths should cross on an investigation. So far, so conventional. Except in the final episode of the tale, Bulman nabs the villains of the particular story by a simple piece of deduction, recognising the face of a passer-by and putting two and two together. He was not presented as a foil for our hero to get the better of in the manner of Raffles versus Inspector Mackenzie. After 13 episodes, Bulman with Willis were then placed into a new series, Strangers. So who are the Strangers? The idea is they are a squad of detectives who have been transferred to a different part of the country as a CRD force and would not be recognised by the local villains. So one week Bulman pretends to be a bookkeeper to expose a horse racing racket, or slips back into uniform to investigate a suspected dodgy copper, played in this case by Michael Bird. He cannot make anything stick. Bulman later recruits to help protect a ghastly family whose good-for-nothing husband is a valuable witness to a crime, but is in danger of a damn good beating, or worse. It starts as a comedy episode, with Bulman unable to cope with this ghastly family, such as the mother horrified by what the neighbours must think of them having strangers in the house, and then he has to win over the copper he has tried to put away. But the punchline to the episode is, well, a punch in the gut for everybody. All videotape with filmed inserts. And Bulman did not appear in every episode. And you can immediately tell which one he isn't going to appear in because they simply snip him out of the title sequences, presumably to prevent paying him. These episodes were arguably not as enchanting as the ones in which he did appear. They're not bad, but they just lack his idiosyncrasy. His behaviour. They were ordinary episodes. One of them was Willis and WDC Linda Doran, played by Frances Toppie, who were pretending to be a couple, living in a house staking out suspected villains. Naturally, Willis wants to bed her, because it's the 1970s, and she wanted nothing doing. Willis was often trying to bed his female colleagues, and sometimes succeeded. George tried once, and failed. And very good as our Linda Doran, Toppie is a strong actor, who brought to a thinly written role a characterisation of her own. In the first episode, she high-kicks the villains during the final punch-up. She left after one series and was replaced by Fiona Mollison as WDC Vanessa Bennett, who has a couple of unlucky love affairs during the series. They just keep dying on her, but she was a very capable detective and a very good addition to the team. Lead writer Murray Smith gives us a taste of the future style of Bulman. Surreal. He liked his bisexual villains, a sort of sexual ambiguity that they didn't quite understand at the time. Teenage fashions and styles he liked to make sinister. The odd, the unusual, the downright silly and unconventional. This was to be his signature of Strangers. It is not the Avengers, and neither is it a comedy. It is quite hard to pin down. From the second series, Bulman is undeniably the star. His sidekicks are his acolytes, and he dominated in his own style. He was more a thinker than an action man, but when he needed to, he could punch like the best of them. The second series begins with an all-film episode, and the series of 5 concludes with our George being shot and injured, and held hostage by a couple of vengeful thugs whose crime family wedding he busted in order to arrest a suspect. It must have been a hideous shoot because it was freezing cold, snow on the ground, and our poor George is stuck in the back of a van, most of it bleeding, potentially to death. I wouldn't like to have done that one. Even our George's luck runs out sometimes. And the series ends with his superior officer being sacked. But fear not, actor David Hargreaves ends up being married to Juliet Bravo in a few years' time. For the third series, Bulman and Willis and Bennett are transferred to London to join the Intercity Crime Squad, and now it is all on film. Within seconds of the arrival in the big city, Bulman and Willis try to hitch a lift to their base with an undercover car unit they rumble, and become involved in a car chase. Also coming down with them is John Renane, who plays D.S. Singer, who's been in it since the first episode. He's Bulman's equal initially in rank, but he is such an understated character, his role seems to be just to talk to their new superior, D.S. Jack Lambie, when Bulman doesn't. You barely notice him. As I said, he appears in the very first episode. Frustrated by how Bulman and Willis wanted to break the rules and storm about their new northern patch, and he tries to lay down the law in a very restrained manner, but you can see he wants to explode, and all this while he's trying to type a report. Now, Romaine was marvellous at this kind of sort of restraint and revealing what was bubbling away under the surface. Lambie is future Taggart Mark Mudda McManus. Naturally, he has a history with Bulman. He makes an impact, and from the 4th series he plays a much larger role, and in one member episode we see his somewhat fraught home life brought to head when his wife is kidnapped by a vengeful villain who escaped from prison. The wife does not come home. She survived, but no longer wanted to be a policeman's wife. The domination of Bulman and Lambie in what ought to have been an ensemble piece probably explains why Singer does not appear in the 5th series. Singer is simply swamped by stronger and more distinctive characters. Strangers featured the usual crimes: blackmail, terrorism, murders, hostage-taking, prison breaks, just sometimes unusually solved, with a few stings along the way. This could be a tough series. I refer you to Series 3, Episode 3. No spoilers, but it was not super for one of the cast. Great! Espionage also played a significant role, especially when Thorley Rolters pops up as a senior civil servant figure called Dugdale. I presume is MI5, and he involves Bulman in cases whether he likes it or not, or is indeed aware of it. Dugdale is just as eccentric as Bulman and rarely gets to the point, but treats the policeman with respect. Usually. Where there was grit, there was also style, undermined by the quirky behaviour of Bulman with his interplay with his colleagues and the world around him. Episodes are presented with humour, but it never goes over the top. The stories are seldom rushed, and they are varied in their settings, such as a cloistered Cambridge college where an investigation about computer fraud has an unexpected spy story running in parallel, and in which Bulman stumbles into right at the end, completely unaware. Or how about the one about the goings-on in the Russian circus, where Willis becomes part of a trapeze act? It was quite unlike any other crime series on the telly, and perhaps that is why it's seldom remembered. It doesn't fit in with the run of police procedurals and standout serials. One of my favourite episodes featured Michael Gough, by the way, as a university lecturer with very extreme political views, a penchant for car bombs, and Graham Garden. I'm not saying that Michael Gough had a penchant for Graham Garden, but he's in the episode. Bulman shone in each and every episode. We enjoy his foil balls, his weaknesses. He was stingy, a little vain, and he was fascinated by Lambie's kettle, which was boiling while he was supposed to be receiving a dressing down lecture. The bollocking concludes with Lambie confirming how long it took for the kettle to boil. He knows his George. But he didn't suspect that when his kettle vanishes, Bulman had nabbed it. One episode featured Bulman and Willis escorting a prisoner from Scotland to London. They are attacked and the prisoner escapes. A furious Lambie calls him bent over the phone, as in cricket. You shouldn't have called George bent, says Singer in his trademark style. Bulman resigns, and when Lambie joins them in a Scottish hotel, is promptly knocked out by a superbly delivered punch in retaliation. Lambie gets his own back at the end of the episode. The domination of Bulman, though, does become a problem where the other characters are concerned, because they simply appear to talk about Bulman when he wasn't around, such as Lambie and Singer discussing, or mumbling, Bulman's stalled promotional prospects, which are resolved by the end of the 3rd series. Murray Smith gave the series its own musical feel, namely jazz, and Bulman began his final series of Strangers learning how to play the saxophone, during the course of which he discovered that his courage as a policeman had limits, when he froze in terror during an exchange of gunfire. Who could blame him? He knew his time was nearly up as a copper. Bulman has had enough of the force, and when he hands in his resignation, he reveals to Lambie that he has moved in with his wife. No punches this time, just a handshake. His resignation came right at the end of a 2-part investigation which brought together several elements from the past, such as the wonderful George Pravda, who plays an unusually friendly KGB operative, who in an earlier series helped Bulman track down a Russian serial killer now loose in London. This time he helps Bulman ride to the rescue in a motorbike and sidecar, brandishing shotguns, with a bit of dramatic classical music playing in the background to wrap up his final batch of villains. And that's the end of Bulman in Strangers. So now Bulman is an independent, free from the world of policing. Now George didn't want to become a private detective. He wanted to spend his gratuity and build a clock hospital, which was his sideline in between investigations. No, that side of his life was pushed onto him by his new sidekick, Lucy McGinty, played by Siobhan Redmond. I hope that's how you pronounce her first name, who had been appearing in Ben Elton's Alfresco series at the time. She was originally an Irish character, but they liked her audition so much that they made her a Scot to retain her accent. That doesn't stop an Irish relative from popping up in the series. Now, Lucy's father was a copper who had been murdered, something she relived in a startling scene in the second series. As a child, she was told lots of stories about George Bulman, because apparently he and McGinty worked together quite closely at one point. She abandoned her own academic life, where she was specialising in medieval studies, and come down to London to join forces with him when she discovered that Bulman had left the police force. He is very reluctant to begin with, but by the end of the first episode, it is done and dusted, and STG Investigations is born from the insides of his clock hospital. Their relationship is purely platonic, thank God, and their relationship off-screen was apparently as close as it was on-screen. So she has a surrogate dad, and he apparently now has a surrogate daughter. In the first episode, though, Redmond had a tendency to grin too much, something that was gone in later episodes. She has the poise of the Sphinx and a good line in comedy. Although younger and inexperienced, Lucy McGinty can hold her own against any corner, such as the posh and wealthy grandson who tries and fails to seduce her. That she can stand up for herself is proven after a horrific experience where she is kidnapped and faces execution from rogue Russian elements. Lucy McGinty is just as watchable and enjoyable as Bulman, which to my mind made this series a great success. In the early episodes, we occasionally receive glimpses from his past life. Willis pops up in an early episode to do what he usually did in Strangers, talk about George. Lambie also returns in the second episode, and we discover neither of them are with his wife now. George is now in the cold. His former colleagues won't help him in any of his cases. Dugdale also appears several times, still a deceptively slow and lugubrious character, who rather enjoys the secrets he guards, and his relationship with Bulman can be a little dicey at times. But they do not underestimate each other. George is furious when things have to happen the way they do. A minor thread occurs through some of the first series, featuring Bulman trying to track down an American confidence trickster called Greenstein. We come face to face with Greenstein later in the series in A Cup for the Winner, where the con man tries one con too many and tries to impersonate the American ambassador and con Bulman directly. The series was still a mixture of the very serious and the very bizarre. Take an episode of Antique Thefts, straight out of a Lovejoy novel, but not before Bulman gets Lucy to perform at a jamboree where they are both dressed up as clowns, and Bulman becomes a butler, having kicked out a rude and obnoxious butler who later regrets attempting to beat up Bulman with some of his handy friends. But sometimes the programme can be vicious. Peter Wingard's persecution of a woman is particularly nasty. A great performance though, and it's the last episode in the first series before Bulman has to go undercover in a prison, and the jokes stop. Going undercover is not unusual for our George. He has dressed up as a tramp and lived among derelict warehouses to investigate the death of a spy. Alas, the prison episode meant that George and Lucy had to go on the run, which was rather heartbreaking, as I enjoyed the series very much at the time, and that was mainly down to George himself. I loved the way he was full of literary quotes in either English or French, which nicely contrasted with his rough London mannerisms. I loved his tightness, just look at his face when a cabbie doesn't give him back his change. I loved his rough dress, although his Shakespeare Willpower t-shirt, which is worn over a shirt, is a lovely touch, and first appeared in Strangers, is a visual metaphor for the character. He still wears his mittens, which I remember reading in a newspaper at the time he wore to disguise his wedding ring, and is ready with his nasal inhaler, his equivalent of a Sherlock Holmes 5-pipe problem. Or was it 3? It's his snuff. He also prefers fish and chips to any other sort of posh nosh, and merrily eats with his fingers, but he is hard as nails, cannot be intimidated, and he is well known to all the villains of the manor, and will place himself in extreme peril for the sake of cracking a case or saving a life. He is also kind, gentle, and funny. The second series began in the summer of 1987, running at the same time as Star Cops. It was a much shorter series and was not well publicised because it was designed to be the end of the road for George. But Don Henderson felt it was being quietly dropped to avoid an outcry similar to when Michael Grade wielded the axe on Doctor Who. He was also annoyed that the series never received primetime repeats. I remember the first series being repeated on weekday afternoons in the Anglia regions in 1987. Frankly, it wasn't as good as the first series, but it still had its moments, and if you want to see Don Henderson naked, the third episode is the one for you. The series begins with Bulman and Lucy returning from exile in Hong Kong. He is tougher and meaner and resumes his life, ousting out those who wanted to kill him in revenge, in a thinly disguised homage to Sherlock Holmes' The Empty House. There's even a dummy of George for the villains to shoot. The new series put them through harder emotional issues. George may have met his illegitimate son, for example, and Lucy faces death, but there's still the very, very quirky plot lines and humour. Now, I am going to talk spoilers, so if you haven't watched the series or reached the final episode, I don't know, just put your fingers in your ears for a bit. In the last episode, Bulman and Lucy are set up to be assassinated. Gunmen burst in, spray the room with bullets, and blood erupts from their torsos. They are dead. Also, we think the gunmen escape, and the bodies are taken into the ambulance, where it turns out that they've been wearing special effects rigs to simulate blood. A painful experience for Henderson, who I remember discussing it in a Saturday morning's newspapers. Spoilers! They once again have to go undercover. Or did they? The final scene is distinctly strange. They are in a living room. Bulman complains that his saxophone has taken a bullet. Lucy wonders what they are going to do next, and then within a minute she has decided to leave. And there she is, ready with suitcases. And a taxi suddenly arrives. All this in the space of the scene? Surely they are dead, and are in the waiting room of the afterlife. Always bothered me, that. Except, in one of the first series episodes with Freddie Jones, there's a genuine ghost in the church hall, playing an organ, turning the pages of a hymn book. And that was the end of Bulman. Don Henderson next appeared in Knights of God, which I never gave much of a chance, and Doctor Who's Delta and the Bannermen. He stayed with BBC One and joined Murray Smith and then Leslie Grantham, who was now free from playing Dirty Denning in EastEnders, for 2 series of the Paradise Club, which takes its name actually from a club seen in the very first episode of Strangers. It is another bizarre and stylishly shot series, which I have to confess I was never really drawn into. It wasn't Bulman. Lucy McGinty had little to smile about when she went between the lines as a copper, investigating crooked coppers, and had quite the personal journey herself this time. But at least she outlived her colleagues. I might tell you about that one day.
Many thanks to Michael for that. Michael's got a huge range of books available from various publishers.
Mm-hmm.
But you might like to visit saturdaymorningpress.co.uk, where you can find some of his recent works, including volumes on R3, Swizzlewick and Doomwatch. And there's more to come. So some exciting stuff on the way, I understand.
Mm-hmm.
But now, Warren takes a trip with Sir John Betjeman to
Metroland.
Hello. How we view the world is often influenced through how we interact with others, accept their differences, and hopefully this will help us build and accept and give us an open and understanding mind. Today, social opinions and viewpoints are often gathered through so many different mediums. The explosion of social media, even the world of the podcast, is strewn with pseudo-influencers, online historians and fledgling urban explorers who are just bursting to educate, fascinate and broaden our knowledge base, all in their unique way. But way before the advent of such technology, it was the job of the professional lecturer or humble village school teacher to forge our values, opinions and appreciation of the maelstrom that is social history. As the world became a noisier and faster-paced place, we often chose to forget our heritage, often leaving it behind, instead replacing it with, well, the bland, if you like, or getting rid of the ornamental or the artistic with a throwaway alternative. In a previous edition of Round the Archives, listeners may remember I recanted a television series looking at the architectural development of Britain, hosted by the passionate and often opinionated critic Ian Nairn. Nairn became a hero of mine. The more I read and the more I watched of him, the more I was educated and saw the development of postmodern Britain in an appreciative way. But believe it or not, I'm also an advocate for the past and having a balanced development of our social landscape, be it through the industrial developments of the last 100 years or mankind's desire to seek out the unachievable. That of the elusive, perfect model of life, living in harmony and respecting the environment and the fairness of the equal society. Blimey, that sounds heavy, but what I suppose I'm trying to clumsily say is that rather than trawl through hours of social media or on-demand television programs, I need a new hero to help me understand how a lost generation came itself to understand that sometimes it wasn't a good thing to sweep away the old for the sake of it. And for that, I need a guide who's lived through those times of rapid development and strove to get people to understand that architectural history and heritage was a requirement for the future to grow, not for a reason to hold it back. I didn't want some overinflated tub thumper of a presenter force-feeding me difficult bits to digest of bitterness and regret, or some pompous, self-effacing professor who would give me a sense of inferiority as they metaphorically looked down from their highly educational dais. Then I remembered a name that was always a cue for a smile, the man whose ridiculous yet gentle presentation of social architectural history brought back into fashion 2 words: historic conservation. Regularly appearing on our television screens in the 1950s, 60s and 70s, he would attract huge audiences, but would shy away from that limelight of a terrible tag called celebrity, but yet hold the everyday person in appreciation of the artistic grandeur of something as mundane as a railway journey in the post-beaching era, or a stroll from Hyde Park Corner to Edgware along one of London's most ever-changing roads back during the 1970s. Born at the beginning of the 20th century, my quarry was taught the joys of poetry by T.S. Eliot at a young age, and this would trigger something in our hero. Moving to university, he was lectured by C.S. Lewis, who did regard him as a lazy pig. However, our hero saw Lewis as an arrogant, rude arse. Leaving his studies, or rather failing his degree, our hero leaves to seek his fortune. Working as a clerk within the civil service, he would work his way up the pole, and even spent his time wrapped up in espionage during the Second World War. But more about that later. He was a true eccentric with a passion for prose and an eye for a descriptive verse. A man who gazed upon the beauty of the world through its past while projecting the beauty of it through his poetry. A line of communication that you would think was a little strange for a modern audience. But for this soon-to-be poet laureate, he would be one of 2 generations of British people who would be taken deeply into their hearts. His poetry would be his platform for his real passion. He was appalled at what he described as the rape and pillage of Britain's architectural history. He lambasted the concrete-obsessed builders of the 1960s and 70s, fighting crusades to save some of London's most iconic transport buildings. He managed to turn away the bulldozers from that red brick Gothic cathedral of travel, St Pancras Station, where today a statue of him stands in recognition of his most valiant hour. Alas, he was unable to save the Ionic columns of Euston Station, and they were soon to be turned to rubble, to be replaced by an asphalt bus station and a fusion of steel, concrete and glass that would become the early 1970s Euston Station. However, on an ironic note, today's developers who are looking to replace the 1970s building have envisaged the return of those Ionic columns. In doing so, totally vindicated our hero. So, who is our hero?
That Pickwickian figure in the frightful hat is, I'm sorry to say, me talking to the station master. But a station master's life, that's something worth living.
Sir John Betjeman, poet, campaigner, TV personality, and the Queen's most favourite poet laureate. Loathed by the green-eyed established of old dusty poets, his rhyming descriptive poetry was regarded by them as inferior, and they couldn't see why the public loved him. Or was it just because they couldn't get over their own jealousy of his fame and notoriety?
Do you get really melancholic about
Yes.
back? Do you
I
really,
can't bear it. I don't belong to a press-cutting agency. There was a time when I longed to see my name in print. Now I see it with dread. And
does it really affect you?
Oh, I
mentally?
always believe it's true. I believe anything
Well,
that's
that's
said against
trouble.
me is true, and anything that's said in my favour is flattery.
Really?
Yes, I never can believe
Yes.
that I'm any good at all.
From the 1930s, he has written small books of poetry that have sold in their tens of millions around the world. He had the ability to appeal to the highest academic or to the lowest of the working classes. In the 1950s, he wrote travel books, which were supported by 15-minute films as he toured the length and breadth of the British Isles. In the 1950s, the BBC invited him to travel around his favourite places and recite his poetry, and so this is how his television career started. But 50 years ago, way back in 1973, the BBC again let Betjeman indulge his passion for steam railways, coupled with his unique descriptive ability in a wonderful, eccentric slice of social history. He basically looked at the developmental history of the Metropolitan Railway, or known to Londoners as the Underground's Metropolitan Line. It was the seed that created the suburbs of London, the Metropolitan Line, and it had another name, Metroland. We start our adventure with our pork pie hatted time traveller in a railway bar deep in the heart of Buckinghamshire. I like to use the term time traveller when describing Sir John, as he has a seamless ability to allow us to join him in inhaling the air of yesteryear and exhaling the blandness of the modern 1970s. A whistle blows and he puts down his empty pint pot in a very staged manner. Like Nairn, he's not one of television's natural actors, and quickly boards the old Edwardian railway carriage for his journey into northwest London.
Child of the First War, forgotten by the Second, we called you Metroland. We laid our schemes, lured by the lush brochure, down byways beckoned to build at last the cottage of our dreams, a city clerk turned countryman again, and linked to the metropolis by train.
Once arriving in busy, bustling London, we find him enter a large Victorian building above the entrance to Baker Street Station. Leaving those filthy streets of London behind, he walks into opulent luxury of the Metropolitan Hotel's dining halls, with large paintings of the Buckinghamshire countryside hanging from its walls and thick cushioning carpet making every step buoyant, giving it this softness and reassurance feeling underfoot. He regales the viewer with stories of housewives meeting their husbands after they finished a day's work and the tireless chitter-chatter of the afternoon tea set. It's a time of routine and regularity, a safe time before the Great War. Our time traveller, with his rhyming verse and soothing voice, is almost hypnotic in his reminiscing, allowing the viewer to fall headlong into the amazing work that he produces. Alas, a world that is so much the antithesis of that modern day. He explains how the Metropolitan Railway, with its grand station at Baker Street, has already created the world's first underground railway. But aside from that, to its wooden planked platforms, aside from its entrances into the dark tunnels of Hades, you could take a steam trip out to the countryside and Verney Junction in Buckinghamshire, a station which was hoped to be the Clapham Junction on the Midland Main Line. This was the seed that grew into what we now term as suburbia, those reachable escapes to the green hills, close enough for work, far enough away to escape the humdrum of a claustrophobic city life. But even at that time, he was holding back a dark secret, which wouldn't come to light until the 1970s. Our time traveller wasn't as he seems. Now, I'm very lucky to have had a bit of an insight into the history of Baker Street Station. Above it is a building known as Selby House, and part of Selby House contained where I used to work. And like our time traveller, it had a very colourful past. Selby House was once the headquarters of the Metropolitan Railway Board and was attached to the Grand Metropolitan Hotel, was where our time traveller, of course, started his journey. During the Second World War, some of the rooms were handed over to the government for war-related work. Railway employees were told it was for a civil defence planning complex. However, it was really a training building for the Special Operations Executive, the organisation that basically trained spies and sent them behind enemy lines. In its basement was the London Transport Pistol Range, which during the war was used by the Home Guard in the evenings and the SOE operatives during the night. Alas, now lost to the tube lines of the Jubilee line, it was a regular haunt of our time traveller. You see, in the 1940s he was a private secretary to the British ambassador in Ireland. He was tasked with feeding back information to the British government as to the strengths and operations of the Irish Republican Army, the IRA. He did this for about 2 years. Basically, the British government was afraid that the Irish soldiers would allow Nazi Germany to invade and form a bridgehead in which they could bomb and destroy the infrastructure on the British mainland. Regardless of the conflict, the IRA saw war as an ideal opportunity to promote their cause, and they basically drew up an assassination list of some of the British dignitaries in Ireland. Our time traveller was at the top of the list. He was totally unaware of this at the time, and I'll tell you a little later how he came close to becoming a victim of that said list. Taking the tube out of Baker Street, our time traveller waxes historic lyrical about long-forgotten stations, one now using its station building as a steakhouse of all things. No meal on expenses here, as time is short, and we are about to visit the Gothic retreat of local priest John Hugh Smythe Piggott, whose Clapham parishioners declared him to be Christ. As you do. It has a uniqueness, this property. It stands out like it's been lifted straight from the set of a Hammer horror film. A dark silhouetted shape cutting into the skyline with its towering buttresses and demonic appearance. Filmed at jaunty angles and with a background of dark hammered organ music playing, you can almost expect Christopher Lee to emerge from the front door. Peppered with potted history and his own rhyming verse, our time traveller's voice overs are both witty, insightful and educational. Plus, you get the impression he really wished he lived here. Rattling at the pace of an express train, we head into the Neasden area. Still a quiet suburb in the 1970s, just before it embraced multiculturalism and far away from the bustling hub that it is now. The late Willie Rushton there singing a song to celebrate the wonderful part of London known as Neasden. That would have also just been released in 1973. Our time traveller describes this suburb as Gnome Central, or the home of the garden gnome. And to accompany it, there's some subtle shots to back this up. Rushing through to Wembley Park and the site of the Empire exhibition, which our time traveller visited as a child. He stands outside the location where Barbara ploughed through a group of Daleks in a corporation dust cart in the Dalek invasion of Earth in 1964. In fact, the whole journey seems to be a liberal sprinkling of Doctor Who filming locations, because next, it's Harrow on the Hill. And Harrow on the Hill and the great backbone of the establishment is touched upon. The private school, straw boaters, blazers and plummy British accents all go here to educate. And on the outskirts of Harrow, Harrow Weald in fact, is a house which can be quite happily described as a manor house within its own grounds. It goes by the name of Grimm's Dyke.
I came out of a low entrance hall into this bigger hall, and then one doesn't know what's coming next. There's an arch. If I go up there, I'll see goodness knows what. Let's go and look.
Obey the Daleks! You are in our power!
And to find out what is through the door, you'll have to watch the programme. It's far more terrifying than any number of Daleks, I can assure you. Into the sticks now and the leafy Pinner, and its quaint countryside town feel really, and its annual medieval fair. The whole production is lovingly made, both showcasting our time traveller's large repertoire of poetry, coupled with letting us look back into the large slice of social history of that time. Cars on the driveway, all being washed on a Sunday. Immaculate lawns being mowed and rolled with Suffolk Punch lawnmowers with shiny green cutting boxes. The sounds of hapless amateur DIY experts repairing the guttering, a lost time encapsulated in just a handful of frames. Our journey leads us into the countryside of Hertfordshire. We find the English eccentric is alive and well. We visit the domestic bliss of a family of 2 children and their parents. Oh yes, and Dad has a full-size Wurlitzer organ in the front room. Bet the neighbours love him.
He moved out of the Empire Cinema, Leicester Square, the mighty Wurlitzer, till the huge instrument filled half his house with all its multitude of sound effects.
Into the malty greens of Buckinghamshire, we arrive at the end of the current line at Amersham. Not content with this, our time traveller carries on up the line towards Aylesbury and Quainton Road Station, better known as the station in Black Orchid. Pining for times lost, our time traveller reaches the very end of the line to be greeted by the green grass stretching forever as nature recaptures the lost land taken by the railway.
The houses of Metroland never got as far as Verney Junction. Grass triumphs. And I must say, I'm rather glad.
As a programme, it's both different, fresh, and something I really wouldn't have picked up from the video or DVD shelf. But once viewed, it never leaves you, regardless of the fact that you may not even be a Londoner, have any interest in trains, or hanker back to a bygone age. It still holds so much for that first-time viewer. Oh yes, and how did our time traveller escape being shot as a spy? Well, in 1980, an elderly gentleman from Ireland wrote to Sir John and explained that he was tasked with assassinating him in 1942. This assassin took his trade very seriously. He explained he liked to find out about the background of his intended targets. So, to find out more about him, he started to read some of Sir John's poetry. So impressed by the quality of his work and how the books almost spoke to him, he convinced his superiors that this man should not be killed, as he believed killing Sir John would rob the world of a fantastic talent. And how right they were. You can track down Sir John's television work on YouTube, and there is such a fascinating back catalogue too. Metroland is still available on DVD through all good stockists, and of course his poetry books are still in print.
Many thanks to Warren for that.
Yes, thank you, Warren.
Metroland was on iPlayer for a while, wasn't it?
was,
I think
yes.
BBC 4 might have shown it.
Yes.
But we do have it on DVD somewhere
we
in
do.
the house.
It's over there. I know exactly where that one is, actually, for once.
Have we watched it?
No.
Not yet?
No.
Okay, fair enough. Warren's podcast is still available.
It is.
The Cinematic Sausage.
Yes, he's doing some new episodes.
Yes. So, and he's got quite a big back catalogue as well, hasn't he?
He has.
Well,
yes.
hey.
Mm-hmm.
Right, now Paul and Toppie come and have just a general natter about old telly.
Yes.
And they do get quite obscure.
They do indeed.
Hello, Round the Archives people. It's me again, Paul the Shayeti, and I've got Toppie Smellie here. How are you? Hey. I was just thinking, rather than talking about a specific TV show, I was kind of thinking, because I've been recording episodes of my show where we're looking at different TV years, and quite often it pops up with like so-and-so TV show makes its debut in Britain, or so, you know, a lot of the big shows we got, but maybe we got them 6 months or a year afterwards. In the case of something like Buck Rogers and Battlestar Galactica, we almost got them the same week, even though one of them had pretty much finished in America at the time. I don't know whether we got a buy one get one free deal, but I was also wondering, the other day I was recording an article for Martin for his show, and I thought I'd just randomly look on YouTube to see what cult TV shows you could find on YouTube. You know, if you happen to be away from the, but without your collection. And I ended up watching an episode of The Invaders, an episode of Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, a 2-part episode of Bewitched, and an episode of Wild Wild West. And some of those shows I knew better than others, or some of them I encountered years after they'd been shown. Some of them I don't know how soon after they debuted in the States they debuted in the UK. By the time I saw them, they were probably, presumably, were on second or third repeats. But the Invaders was one that I particularly liked when I first saw it in the mid-'80s and then again in the early 90s.
Yeah, that was something I never caught back in the day. I would have been pretty darn young, and my guess is my parents didn't watch it, and so I never saw it. But I have caught a few, probably on YouTube. Yeah. And it's unusual in that it is a Quinn Martin production, who sold and made mostly detective shows, police dramas, like The Streets of San Francisco, et cetera, et cetera. And this was his foray into something completely different. It's interesting.
Yeah, the episode I randomly watched was a court drama where somebody had murdered somebody, but they murdered them because they knew they were an alien, or did they know? There was all the sort of usual court drama stuff, which I had to be in the right mood for courtroom dramas, because there was all these added different things and twists, and including a scene where this old man and this old woman turn up claiming to be the mother and father of the alien, and that, oh no, he's just a normal boy and lovely, and David Vincent follows them out of the court, and they kind of go, ha ha ha, as good as, it's not as cheesy as that, but they kind of go, David, we know that, and then they kind of pop these pills and dissolve like up in flame like the aliens always did. And I thought, God, I wish all courtroom dramas had as much tension and aliens burning up by coffee machines. Yeah, it made me want to watch the whole series again. It's a very serious, but there's not much humour in The Invaders, but it did influence a lot of. Well, there's only elements of the Invaders and things like X-Files and shows like that, and even Kolchak. And
famously, Roy. Here, I don't know how to pronounce his name. Thines or Thin?
Yeah, I'm not. I always think it's Thinnis, but I don't really know.
Thinnis. I bet that's it. Roy Thinnis. He famously guest starred on the X-Files.
Yeah, I thought he did.
Yeah, he did.
And so did Darren McGavin, didn't he? I think.
Yeah. He was really. It was actually one of the last things he did was. Appearance. Talking about obscure TV shows, it just so happens that so many of them, the ones I'm aware of, are sci-fi related. Yeah. Because famously in the U.S., networks really tried to get different shows that, are sci-fi or sci-fi adjacent going. And every single time it would be like a bomb, So consequently, there's so many television series that I can think of that I'm interested in that maybe had only 6 episodes or maybe 13.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to toss out a few of these names, and I'm curious if they ever made their way over.
Yeah.
And you saw them. So here's one. I was gaga for Planet of the Apes. Well, there was a Planet of the Apes television series. It only lasted 13 or 14 episodes, but I loved it. Did that ever make its way over there?
I presume it did. I'm certainly aware of it. I don't know if I ever saw it, but considering how there are quite a lot of movies, and considering the movies are still being. I actually have a friend who is involved with making one of the most. I think there must be a new one coming out this year or next year. And a friend of mine who's been on the podcast is involved in filmmaking and is somehow involved in that production. So it's a franchise that's lasted for such a long time. Surprised a TV show didn't do better, but.
Well, I am too. It was one of those shows that almost the entire thing was shot outside because that's a very cheap way of doing things.
Yeah.
And but they had a lot of the feel of the original movie because some of the places where they lived and were reminiscent, and also had Roddy McDowall, who was in. Was the main draw, really.
Yeah.
Because he played a chimp called Galen, but it might as well have been Cornelius, Oh, here's another one. Something called Fantastic Voyage.
I certainly know of the title, and I may have seen the odd clip, but I don't. I mean, it may have made its way over, but in the 70s.
I may have this mixed up, but I swear to God, Roddy McDowell was in that one too. There's something called The Powers of Matthew Starr, or maybe it was just called Matthew Starr.
Again, I recognise that title. It could well have come over and then, but not have had sort of more recent repeats or been on a more repeated on a satellite channel.
Mm-hmm. They tried to make a TV series out of Logan's Run.
I've heard about that.
And by the way, I ain't saying any of those shows were great, but because my God, the Logan's Run TV show, oh my God, it's worth it's worth seeing it because it's just so of its time.
Yeah.
Gee, now there were some others that came across my mind, but it was rare for a science fiction series to make it. The Bionic Woman and the $6 Million Man are exceptions. They both had a long, they're sci-fi adjacent.
I feel like the Bionic Man definitely got repeated more often than the Bionic Woman, because I do remember only being used as afternoon filler material, but it would have had its time when it was probably more prime time, but probably before I was watching TV. But I do remember perhaps in the late 80s or 90s it being used as daytime film, but I don't remember seeing Bionic Woman until I bought a DVD of it. But
This one's just somewhat obscure. It actually was kind of, it actually had decent ratings, not great, but decent. The Greatest American Hero. That
doesn't ring a bell, but
really.
No, but I mean, it might just be because it was slightly before my time, or
it even had a theme song that got regular play on AM radio. If you Google it, you could probably play 13 seconds of it or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. And oddly enough, I don't know. It stayed around for maybe 3 seasons, and I would say that's a cult hit. The X-Files, incredibly popular. That doesn't happen. I mean, even Battlestar Galactica, which was after Star Wars, you would have thought that thing would have stayed on for the next 10 years.
Yeah,
no, just one season.
Yeah.
One season. Buck Rogers did it better. I mean, not better, but I mean, I think that lasted 3
slightly
seasons.
Longer, yeah.
But, another obscure one. The Man from Atlantis.
I don't think I've ever seen it, but I definitely know it because it had Patrick Duffy in it from Dallas. And things.
Yeah, right before he did Dallas. And it's lucky for him, I'll tell you what, that Man from Atlantis wasn't exactly a blockbuster, because he went on, he had a much longer career as Bobby Ewing on Dallas. And if he had been too busy with he never would have gotten his role on Dallas.
You also have lots of interesting daytime soaps that with weird plot lines, and there's one where there's a killer puppet or somebody's killing.
Yeah. I think that was Days of Our Life.
Oh, I was thinking, is it Dead of Night? Is that another one?
I've never heard of that.
Oh, maybe I've got it.
I mean, maybe they retitled it. So there was a soap, and this is long after Dark Shadows bit the big one, but sometime in the 80s, I think they said, you know what was really successful once? There was this soap called Dark Shadows, and it was incredibly popular, and they did weird things. And I think they just said, why don't we try doing some weird things? And it did work for them. I think they got more viewers.
Yeah, I was going to tell you, I can't remember the exact episode number, but as you know, Dark Shadows was never shown prime time or on any of the main channels in the UK. By the time I got to see it, it was on a satellite channel in the 90s. So that's how I got to see it via, Lisa was one of the people who recorded a lot of it for me. But there was a theme night, a soap opera theme night on Channel 4, which, and again, probably early 90s. Yeah, it must have been, because I knew what Dark Shadows was. So that's the only episode. The theme was soap operas, but it was soap operas from around the world and sort of picking weird examples of soap operas. So they showed an episode of Dark Shadows. But the episode they chose, it must have been like, I don't know who sourced that episode, who thought that was a good episode to show, but it was involving the Phoenix plot line, but it was the second time Laura Collins came back. So it was in colour, so it's about from 69 or something like that, but no Barnabas in the episode. No, none of, I don't know if Angelique was even there. It was a very unrepresented episode of Dark Shadows to show. You think you'd have gone for a vampire one, or one with a lot of the, maybe another subplot, maybe. It was just very strange. I've always wondered who on earth gave them that episode. But
if I was sourcing that out, I would have said, it absolutely has to be a scene with Barnabas and Julia. And why don't we find that episode where Quentin's a werewolf and Barnabas and Julia. So there you got the three of them. Yeah. Quentin was incredibly popular. Julia, Barnabas. You got to find a clip like that.
Yeah, I mean, they showed the whole episode with no real explanation about the show, but considering it's known, if you were going to name one word to do with Dark Shadows, you'd say Barnabas, and Barnabas didn't show up in the episode. I mean, I like the Phoenix plot lines. I mean, the first time the Phoenix appeared in Dark Shadows, that was one of the early days of doing something weird on Dark Shadows. So I do appreciate that. They didn't go for necessarily for obvious, but they did need to kind of have, if you're showing one episode, you show an obvious episode. But it also reminded me when we were talking about the Invaders that they did do a 90s like TV movie. I don't know if it was supposed to be a pilot, but Roy Thinnis appeared in it. Well, I was also going to say Roy Thinnis played the head of the Collins family in the 1991.
Oh yeah. Roger.
Yeah, he played Roger, didn't he?
I forgot about that.
Yeah, but when they did the Invaders mini-series, Roy Thinnis was only like in a scene, but the main character was played by Scott Bakula from Quantum Leap or Star Trek later on. So a lot of these shows kind of overlap, or the people in them overlap.
Quantum Leap, sci-fi adjacent, incredibly popular. Went on for what? I don't know how many.
5 seasons, I think.
That's amazing for something that's a little different, Just to get back to Dark Shadows for just a brief second. I know you know the answer to this. I just can't think of the name of the damn thing. But it was either from Canada or from the UK, and they basically did their own version of Dark Shadows. It was a gothic, it was spooky things in a spooky old house. What the hell was that called?
Strange Paradise, I think.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah. A lot of it was on, a lot if not all of it's on YouTube. So I started watching it. I got to about episode 30, but I was aware that it wasn't the whole series and there was a gap. But then I think I looked a few months later and I think somebody had put up the episodes that were missing. So I should get back into it because I was quite enjoying it.
But talk about obscure. Was it from Canada or the UK? Yeah,
Canada. Yeah.
Okay.
It was sort of 1969, 1970, something like that. It's one of the. I'm on a forum for it on Facebook, and for months you don't hear anything. And then this last week, people have been posting. I think someone might have started a podcast about it,
I know we've discussed it because I only discovered it 7 years ago or something like that.
Yeah, my friend Adam from Found Monkeys podcast said to me, just mentioned it as if I knew it, and I was like, no, just come back a minute. What's this show? And he was like, oh, I thought you'd know about it. No, tell me more.
I think it was you. I think you're the one that told me about it. I think.
Yeah. These podcasting networks are very useful.
So I named some obscure ones in America. What do you remember being like one-hit wonders or just something you liked but was not around for very long?
British shows or
either
or. Well, Blake Seven is a sort of that was a 4-season sci-fi show. made by the creator of the Daleks in the late 70s. That's got
David
quite a big...
McCallum.
No, that's Sapphire and Steel.
Oh, God.
Yeah, Sapphire and Steel is also kind of very, very British known show with Joanna Lumley and David McCallum. That's there's nothing that much like Sapphire and Steel.
Okay.
Blake Seven is sort of like Rebels, and there's I guess it has sort of similarities to Star Wars in a way. I mean, it was that same sort of time. Yeah, I'm trying to think of other shows, or at least cult TV shows. There's a lot of shows that, we did, but obviously Doctor Who, but that's not obscure enough, really. Although for a long time it was still pretty obscure. Yeah, most of the shows that I was interested in that were lesser known. I mean, going back to America, the Wild Wild West was one that totally passed me by for, I don't know if it was shown over here in the 70s or the early 70s or even the late 60s, but it was one that I always wanted to see and only got to see when somebody loaded it up on YouTube much more recently. Yeah, I mean, things like Voyage Spot in the Sea, that took a while for me to see, because when they started repeating Owen Allen shows in the late 80s, it was the last of the 4 they showed. You know, so some of these shows you watch a season or two and you begin to sort of, I kind of need a break now. But seeing them week after week continuously for years. But yeah, when I was
going to say Voyage lasted more seasons than
it was. Yeah,
Allen. And of course, it was based on a movie or
movie
Allen did.
Yeah,
which I don't know, wasn't terrible.
At least it got 4 full seasons, because The Invaders, I was reminded that the first season of The Invaders, I don't know if it was a season replacement for something, but it's a shorter season, and then they get a full second season. But unfortunately, it never went beyond that, but never had a proper last episode. But
and they're not all things I remember were sci-fi based. Just for example, Happy Days here was tremendously popular and went on forever. But there was a little spin-off series called Joni Loves Chachi.
Yeah, I've heard of that. I don't know if it ever showed over here. I guess
I don't know if it lasted more than 6 episodes.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Lord.
What's that one you mentioned about my something the car? What was that one?
Oh, My Mother the Car. Oh, my God. This was a little too different for people. And it was stupid. But it was that era when shows like I Dream of Jeannie, My Friend the Martian, or my favorite Martian. Yeah. Bewitched. These shows where somebody could do something magical. Even Mr. Ed, the talking horse.
Yeah, we definitely got repeats of Mr. Ed.
It was that era where there was something unusual that happened in one household that was a secret. You know, Jeannie being a genie was a secret. The Sam being a witch was a secret. And in this case, the secret was this guy's mother was reincarnated into a car. Duh. And it was just so preposterous. The only thing that's super interesting to me about it is that it starred Dick Van Dyke's brother, Jerry Van Dyke, who, in his own way, was really just as good as his brother, Dick Van Dyke, but he never gained the fame that his brother did until I think he got onto something called Coach. I can't remember now. And he had a long run as a side character. I think it was Coach. But anyways, My Mother the Car was such a bizarre concept that I don't think people, and nobody knew what to make of it.
I also remember, although I think this was pretty normal, I don't think there's anything particularly strange like this. Do you remember at one stage when we were kids, we were, like summer holidays, we'd have Champion the Wonder Horse?
No, never heard of it.
No, and I'm sure that was American, but I mean, I'm really surprised that wasn't 50s, because it was black and white and seemed very old back.
Okay, that could be 50s television. My God, that's practically all there were Westerns.
Yeah, it did have that Western feel. When I was doing the recording with Martin about those 4 shows I watched, other than The Invaders, which was other than having invaders aliens in, it was there wasn't anything too sort of alarming in it. But the other 3 shows had a few tropes that were very 60s or very jump the shark. In the Wild Wild West, we had a man in an ape suit. Although I remember feeling quite sad when the ape died. I believed it. I believed in it. The episode of Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea had dinosaurs, although I think some of the dinosaurs were probably stolen from a movie. They couldn't probably get dinosaurs. The dinosaurs are quite expensive to get in films. Real ones anyway. I know because we did that in Sutton Park. We had to have clockwork ones. But
Irwin Allen was famous for recycling things. And he had done, oh goodness, what was it? The Island That Time Forgot or something. And he dressed up lizards to look like dinosaurs.
Yeah, there were lizards this was done. And there was also possibly an alligator with horns stuck to its head. And I was a little bit worried because they were fighting, and I was wondering whether, were they friends off set? What was going on? But
no, they really were fighting and drawing.
Yeah.
So a lot of people look down on that now.
Yeah. And then in the episode of Bewitched, Sabrina, Sam's cousin, who also played by Elizabeth Montgomery. I always loved when she played her. She turned an Italian businesswoman into a chimp, and that was standard Bewitched fare there. But,
it's possibly Bewitched, but absolutely, definitely, I Dream of Jeannie used many, many, many of the props that were made for Land of the Giants. Another Irwin Allen series that
I quite like Land of the Giants too.
I did too, and a lot of those props, fortunately, were kept around. So there's a lot of scenes of Jeannie like hiding behind a mug, and there's a pencil in the mug, and of course they're gigantic props.
Lucky.
Those were all from Land of the Giants.
We were so lucky in those days, like having somebody as gifted as Elizabeth Montgomery stay with a show like Bewitched for 8 years. I know she had connections with the producer and stuff, but to have she was such a natural.
Yeah, she really was. I mean, she just made it look easy, and she was funny,
Okay. Well, Toppie, I suppose we've got to hand back to Andrew and Lisa, but I think it was nice to just sort of talk generally this time, not rather than picking on one little show, but
so many.
Yeah, so hopefully we'll be invited back and we can talk some more soon.
I hope
okay. So. Okay, bye for now. Back to you, Lisa and Andrew.
Bye.
Bye.
Well, next Friday evening, Varian and the others continue their fantastic journey when they're captured by strange creatures from another solar system who are themselves subjected by a stranger called Willoway. That's Fantastic Journey at the same time next Friday, 7:10.
Many thanks to Paul and Toppie for that.
Yes, thank you, boys.
Paul and Toppie are old hands at this podcasting lark. Paul may be heard on the Shy Life podcast and Toppie on the Smellcast.
Mm-hmm.
But now, here's you and me to round off this issue with a visit to
Dixon of Dock Green.
Good morning, Lisa.
Good morning, Andrew.
I don't often say good morning, do I? It's usually
no.
good afternoon.
No.
I must have got up early today.
You must have.
It's the 9th of July.
It is. 2024.
2024.
Yeah.
So, happy anniversary to Dixon of Dock Green.
Mm-hmm.
For you are 69 today.
Yes.
Jack Warner's a bit older than that.
Yes. Just a little bit.
But I thought it's worth doing a bit more on Dixon of Dock Green. Because you've already appeared on Vision on Sound recently.
I have, yes.
Talking about the showings on Talking Pictures TV.
Yes.
But there's a bit more to say, isn't there, really?
There is, yes.
Especially as they've shown more episodes since you did that.
Yes.
Had you seen much Dixon of Dock Green before these showings? I guess not so much of the black and white stuff.
No, well, because they did do some DVD releases a few years ago.
Yes.
Of some of the colour episodes.
Indeed. Not quite all.
Not quite all. There was one episode they couldn't put on there because they didn't get the rights for it.
Yeah.
which was shown on Talking British TV because the actor involved has passed away since, so there was nobody to object to it being shown.
So you knew Dixon?
I knew Dixon, yeah.
But these black and white ones, I guess, can you even remember the 90s showings of them? Because I can remember seeing them.
No, I don't think I saw them then.
Yeah, because they were on BBC Two in the 90s, a lot of the black and white ones. And we have, of course, the problem that so much of it is missing.
Yes.
So the earliest surviving episode is towards the tail end of season 2.
Yes.
And weirdly, there's a block of 5 episodes.
Yeah.
Postman's Knock, Rotten Apple, Roaring Boy, Pound of Flesh, and Father-in-Law.
Yes.
All of which exist.
Yes.
And I wonder why those blocks of episodes exist. It's the trouble again. Everybody's researched Doctor Who to death, but things like Dixon, there's still a lot that we don't know about it.
Yes.
But these 5 episodes, they're all from August, September 1956. And you made an interesting point that so often those 50s episodes are written off as being sort of dull and boring. And there's various sort of articles that people have published.
Yes.
I've got here About Time, Volume 1 by Tatwood and Lawrence Miles. And there's a little piece on Z-Cars and Dixon of Dock Green.
Okay.
And it uses words like the monologues were dull, the drama was mesmerically tedious. You'd watch now in a state of disbelief on the edge of the seat waiting for anything to happen. And even at the time when that was published, because this was published about 2006, I think, I remember thinking, well, that's pretty unfair to the show, because if it was that dull, how come it lasted
for 22 years?
21 years. So what's your impression of the 50s stuff, especially?
It's not cosy.
Yeah.
It's actually ahead of its time in some ways, because you have WPCs in it.
Yeah.
Well, you have a sergeant. You have 2 sergeants, one of them played by Anne Riddler, and various WPCs. When you get to the 70s, which you would think would be more enlightened, there are no female police officers in it at all, apart from there's one in the episode Sounds, and she gets a tiny, tiny bit to do.
Yeah.
And there's one in the episode Wasteland, and she's bait basically because that story is about somebody's attacking women.
Yeah.
So she's just basically there to try and draw this person out. I don't think she even speaks.
Yeah. There are female roles in the 70s, but they're mostly either slightly dodgy, like in, is it Looters Limited?
Looters Limited, where it's a sort of female
circle
of crime
thieves
that, shoplifters.
Yeah, or they're the wives and girlfriends of bad
various
sorts.
Villains.
Yeah.
I mean, there is the one episode, A Slight Case of Love, where, for want of a better word, where the villain is female, and I think that's the one episode where you're actually not wanting her to get caught.
Yeah.
Because she's done it because she's found herself in a financial problem, in a situation, and so she sort of cons money out of various men.
Yeah.
And it's got Julian Glover in, and he's a bit creepy because he wants to marry her.
Postman's Knock as the earliest surviving episode. I always get confused over that because I always think the Rotten Apple is the earliest one. And again, that's just memories of those showings in the 90s. But Postman's Knock, it's sort of poison pen letter thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now, explain what's going on in that one.
So there's going to be first of all, there's going to be some sort of entertainment.
Yeah.
And they need posters for it. So they go to this sort of print shop. I think Andy goes, and he finds out that one of the people working there, one of the owners, is somebody he used to be in a relationship with. And this kind of stirs things up. So she starts to get poison pen letters, and he's at this point he's engaged to Dixon's daughter Mary. She starts to get poison pen letters. And it sort of turns out in the end that she's the one sending them, and that she's deeply unhappy in her marriage. And it's I don't know whether it's to stir her husband up or if it's just like a kind of little bit of excitement.
Isn't there a bit of an undercurrent current of he's not being a man.
No,
or
he's
something
not.
That.
He's not.
He's not
fulfilling his duties.
I was going to say giving her a seeing to, but but yeah, it's sort of it's a bit.
He's not satisfying her.
Oh, is that the word?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and he's basically told at the end of the episode to get a grip on her.
Get a grip.
and
get a grip on what?
Well, and it's quite a sort of chauvinist episode in a way.
Yeah.
So that's slightly going on maybe from what I said before.
Yeah.
But you do have, she's a sergeant, isn't she, Grace Millard, and she's treated much like the rest of the other police officers. They don't treat her different because she's a woman.
Yeah, there's no, we've got a woman, aren't we good?
Yeah.
Or anything like that.
Oh, we've got a woman, isn't she a bit rubbish kind of thing.
She's just there and she gets on with it.
Yeah.
And I think that's more progressive than any other way of doing it, isn't it?
You don't highlight it, she's just another police officer.
Yeah.
So
she's competent as anybody else, and that's the thing. Yeah, those 50s ones are, as I said, they're in a block. Then we get on to just some sort of loose ones, don't we? So
because of course we had the episode Return Duffy Calls the Tune.
Yeah, so that's from 1959.
Yeah.
Now. This was quite exciting, wasn't it? Getting a new episode,
sort of a stray episode.
Yeah, back.
Yeah.
What did you make of that?
It's not the most exciting episode ever. The thing I quite like about Dixon, and this is completely the opposite of what was in what you just read in the what Tapwood has said about Dixon Of Dock Green, is that it is routine crimes.
Yeah.
Not every crime in a police series has to be some sort of big major robbery or a murder or something, because most of the crimes that policemen attend are a bit routine and a bit dull.
I mean, it's the opposite to Midsummer Murders, isn't it? That Midsummer Murders, individually, they're very good stories, but taken as a whole for a series, it's completely unbelievable.
It is, because people do not get killed by cheese or having bottles of wine shot at them with a trebuchet.
Yeah.
So
But yeah, this is all standard stuff, isn't it?
It's routine. It's boring. It's day to day.
Yeah. But is it the characters that make it interesting, do you think? Because Duffy is quite an interesting one.
He is.
That we'd vaguely heard about Duffy.
Yeah.
And there are lots of episodes he was in. But this is the first one that's ever turned up.
Yeah.
So it's this thing of, is a character you've sort of vaguely heard of.
Yeah, he's a local sort of, he's a character.
Character, is that the word? Yeah. I'd like to be a local character one day. I'm working up to that.
Okay.
But who else was in that? Walter Randall.
Walter Randall's in it, looking very young.
Yeah.
Very slim.
The trouble is that these are on Talking Pictures, and you've got a chance to see them with their iPlayer equivalent.
Yes, Encore.
Yeah, but now they're not available again now, is it?
They stay on there for about... What happens is that because they're showing an episode a week, they don't have the facility to keep too many episodes on there.
No.
So that the episode they showed on Saturday will be on there till next Saturday.
Yeah.
But they're also repeating it on a Wednesday. So you do have the chance to, if you have to work out where you are, because it's about 6 weeks or so behind the Saturday showing.
Yeah.
So you've got the chance of either watching it on Talking Pictures on a Wednesday night or watching it on their Encore player after the Wednesday night for a week. Obviously, it's not like BBC iPlayer. They can't keep all of these episodes on there all of the time, and probably they don't have the permission to.
No.
So,
October 1960, you've got the Hot Seat, and that's the...
it's where they go to Paris.
Is that Dixon Of Dock Green does Maigret, basically?
Sort of, yeah. Yeah.
There's an awful lot of sticking a camera out of a taxi window and driving around, isn't there, looking at all the lights.
Basically, they do film out there, but there's no sound.
Yeah.
You get a voiceover from Dixon and a bit of music, and everything else is in studio.
But Mr. Rose is in that, isn't he?
Yeah, he's a bit of a villain as well. So.
Oh, and we should have said is it Pound of Flesh?
Yes.
There's a nice Z-Cars crossover
there is,
as well.
because Leonard Williams, who plays Sergeant Twentyman in that. He's the sort of villain in that, isn't he? So he's a moneylender.
As with all these shows, there's always a connection to something else you'll probably like. So it's just fun to see. You know, I know there are only dribs and drabs, but better than nothing as well. That's the thing.
Because there's also the episode The Team, which is from the late 60s.
Yeah.
Where the villains get away with it.
Yeah, because Martin was surprised, wasn't he?
Yeah. Because I think I know he can't get talking pictures where he lives, but he was away on holiday and they saw it, and he was surprised at the end when they didn't get arrested because they didn't have any proof. So
24th of November 1962, A Home of One's Own. That's an old lady who's a bit of a character, isn't it?
Yes.
So she's going to be
they want to
evicted. Well, I was going to say her house is going to be knocked down.
They want to demolish the houses because they're all in a bad condition. And she doesn't want to leave. So in the end, they take her to this, it's like sheltered accommodation. So that basically they've got rooms there and they've got flats there, but there are people on hand should you need it. And she goes to look at one of these flats and she decides she quite likes it. And she quite likes the fact there's other people there of her age, so she's got people to talk to. And she goes there, and then people start having things stolen. And she helps the police by investigating it and being a bit nosy.
Is she a bit Miss Marpley?
Well,
is she?
She's more, more sort of a little bit. She interferes a little bit, but they do find out who is stealing these things and why.
Yeah.
So
there's a couple from 1963. You've got Green Wedding from January and Before the Ball from the middle of March.
Yeah.
Green Wedding. The green is because it's Irish.
It's
isn't
Irish,
it?
yeah. So basically, it's like sort of Romeo and Juliet, but they're Irish families.
Yeah.
They don't get on, and the son and daughter.
And they're expecting a big punch up.
Yes.
And indeed, there is a big punch up.
There is a big punch up. Yeah. So basically, they get married, and then sort of Dixon and some of the other police attend the wedding reception to make sure there's not too much.
Is
trouble,
action by not quite havoc?
Not quite havoc. Yeah.
But Before the Ball's confused a few people, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Because it's essentially. Is it a two-parter? I don't know.
It's.
I generally don't know because
it kind of is because it's got a cliffhanger.
I note that Before the Ball is episode 200. So had they planned something
a little bit special
because it's episode 200? I don't know.
So because basically at the end of the episode, or towards the end of the episode, Andy gets shot.
Yeah.
But you can't see the next episode because it doesn't exist.
Episode 201 is the end of the trail, and that's also the end of that ninth season as well. So it's amazing that you get to 1963 and we're already on season 9.
Yes,
that's wow. But then we have to do another big jump ahead.
Yeah.
To October 64. It's a scrap of paint. I quite like a scrap of paint.
Yes.
There's a bit of, although there is a bit of all women drivers stuff, isn't
little
there?
Bit, yeah.
Because there's a bit of a car accident, isn't there?
Lordie's Detective Constable Lauderdale, who is
he of the huge moustache,
huge handlebar moustache. His wife and Mary go to the cinema, and when they come back, as they're pulling out, a van hits them and then knocks a cyclist off.
You could hang your washing off of his moustache when it's
huge. It's almost a parody in some way.
Yeah, it's a sort of RAF sort of,
kind of
wing commander. Twiddle it, but he gets rid of it, thankfully.
I did. Warren and I were discussing it when we got because he's in it up until the sort of early 70s.
Yeah.
By the early 70s, he's starting to go a bit thin on top. And we were sort of saying he should have kept his moustache because he could have combed it over.
I think the trouble with that Tash is there's so much wind resistance that when he's running, he can't catch up with any villains, But yeah, scrap of paint is quite fun. And then there's another huge. I mean, there's a few which just say fragments, so there's bits and bobs of film material and things like that. But then we're on to The Team from November 1967. So yeah, Doctor Who's just celebrated its 4th birthday. And Dixon's well into series 14 by that point. So yeah, the team is... It's sort of the old days when people didn't have bank accounts, isn't it? They've all got their money in a shoebox.
Yeah, on top of the wardrobe. And it's extraordinary. It's how much things have changed in the last sort of 60 years, really.
But after that, bang, we're into colour, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Well, barely.
Wasteland from 1970 and Jigsaw from 1971, which are both the all-film ones.
Yes.
And
quite similar.
They're quite similar. I always get them a little bit confused.
Yeah.
But we've said that they've got this real early 70s drab colour palette about them.
Yeah. And I think it's because the film is a little faded.
The film's a little faded, but frankly, where they're filming is quite faded,
it's
isn't
all
it?
sort of green and brown and...
It's sort of sludgy colours, isn't it? Because there's a bit of filming where they've set up they're doing their investigation in some sort of building in Wasteland, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I remember saying to Warren, you can almost smell the urine, can't you, in those horrible concretey buildings, and it's really quite horrible. But then Wasteland especially.
Yeah, it's
just such a depressing episode, isn't it? Yeah. It ain't cosy.
It's not cosy at all. No.
It's we are talking a suicide here, aren't we?
Yes.
But they brush over it, don't they?
I think what they're trying to do, because you get
save the
face of the person who's the police officer who's committed suicide.
But it's very obvious what's happened, and. Yeah, it's nobody wants to admit it, do they?
No, because they've kind of, not them so much, but he's been kind of let down by the system, hasn't he? He's not been supported by the system, so
we got Jigsaw from 71, Molenschitz, wherever you say it, which...
Molenschitz,
so it's another... going on location, bit of a holiday
Holland,
one.
Don't they?
So it's like Dixon Of Dock Green does Vanderbilt now, doesn't
it? Yeah, before Vanderbilt exists.
One wonders where else they might have gone. Would they have gone to Seville? Would they have gone to Lanzarote? Would they have gone to Singapore or something like that in the future? Had the series just kept going. So another big chunk of missing episodes from 72, a few from 73, 74.
Yeah,
you've got Eyewitness, which is, as we always say, the one with the slowest car chase in the world.
Yeah,
you got Harry's Back, got a bit of Sheared in it, always good. Sounds and Firearms were issued.
Yeah,
they're two quite good ones close together as well. I always like those two.
Yeah.
Sounds especially. The sound analysis.
Yeah.
Always like sounds. Firearms were issued, of course, we did many years ago. And then series 21, you've actually got a decent number existing.
Yes. And that features the unforgettable Wangles, Baubles and Baubles, Bangles.
Did you say Wangles?
No,
Wangles, Bangles and Beads.
Baubles, Bangles and Beads.
Must be, yes, okay. Brushing over that one.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the series 21 ends with Conspiracy, May 1975, which you said to me, would it have worked better had the PC been a regular...
Yeah, that we'd seen before.
That you'd seen a bit more in that season.
Because it's hard to care for him. You do.
Yeah.
Because you know that he's probably innocent. But if it had been one of the other PCs that had been in it before...
Because you've had an anonymous letter, haven't you, accusing him
of taking money, taking bribes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
but who's the PC in this?
It's Andrew Burt.
Yeah.
The original Jack Sugden.
But the real notable thing about that is how the series ends.
Yes.
But then, as it turned out, it doesn't.
It doesn't end. No.
As you get a couple of lovely scenes at the end with Jack Warner, he gets a proper sort of
a monologue
speech, doesn't he, about his life And it really does feel like the series is winding up, doesn't it, at that point?
Yeah.
And indeed it was.
Yes.
You know, as we understand it, that was going to be...
The last episode.
But it feels like a bit like sort of, you know, Blake 7, that suddenly they get an extra season. I don't quite know all the ins and outs of it. But given that Conspiracies on the 10th of May 1975... and Dominoes on the 13th of March 1976. That's a pretty quick recommission, isn't it? And I mean, Domino is the one that's literally just been on.
Yes.
And although the series has changed, you know, new title sequence and all that, and Dixon's the collator, so he gets to sit down.
Just stuck in the office, isn't he?
Essentially, Dixon is now just another character in the series, isn't he?
Yeah. You could have called it Dock Green, and it would have just been about the police station.
So the final series does feel like it could have carried on, you know, beyond that, because
beyond these 8 episodes.
You've done a big shake-up of the cast. You've lost Andy, and you've got new people in CID, haven't you?
Which has to be hastily covered by a line.
Yeah, all of this is covered by a couple of lines, isn't it?
It's almost the equivalent of freak weather conditions, isn't it? In Claws of Axos.
You know, basically this is the situation. Get used to it.
Yeah, without having to show all these things happening.
So we've got
8 episodes.
Yeah, so you've got 8 episodes in there, of which we've only rewatched
the
Domino
so far. Yeah,
Domino's got Alan Lake in, doesn't it?
Yes.
Being a bit fighty. Well, he's a bit angry, isn't he?
Pretty much like Alan Lake, really.
Yeah. And Mrs. McCluskey's in it yet again. She's always in it.
She's in it about 4 times, I think.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, you've got Jackpot coming up as well, which is
very good.
Which is really nothing to do with Dixon of Dock Green, is it?
It's basically just an excuse to give
Kenneth Cope goes off
and
goes off and has a good time, doesn't he?
Yeah. With somebody else's money.
Yeah.
And
I mean, that could almost have been a spin-off series in its own, you know, The Adventures of Kenneth Cope. We're looking forward to seeing the rest of these. Hopefully we'll get the issue out before the series finishes.
You never know.
I need to get a shift on with editing, but just seeing Dixon in order, finally, which we've never been able to do.
Because the black and white ones weren't available.
No, has been a... Yes, the huge gaps are very, very frustrating. But it does allow you to see how the series develops, and it does.
It does, yeah.
Obviously, it ran for 22 seasons. Of course, it changed and reflects society and everything like that.
Time when it was made.
But I don't feel that last season needed to be the last season. I think there's potential to... It could have gone in any direction you could have wanted.
Yeah, I know because for the last couple of DVD releases, they had some interviews with some of the cast, and I know there's an interview with Nick Donnelly, who played Sergeant Johnny Wills, and I think they'd said to him,
"Do you want to do it?
Do you want to do it?"
Yeah.
But he didn't want to do it without Jack Warner.
Yeah.
But I think they said before, the basic idea was they just called it Dock Green, and it's just the story of the police station.
Yeah.
And
but mid to late 70s, basically, Dixon finishes, Z Cars winds up, Softly finishes.
Yeah.
Then we start to head towards, you know, Juliet Bravo and things like that. So there's a definite shift in the police series. But, you know, you can definitely draw a line between Dixon and Juliet Bravo, can't you? Because of the types of things that they're investigating. It's not...
Yeah, because Juliet Bravo, again, it's routine
It's ordinary,
stuff, apart from the one with the bear.
Yeah.
You know, it's just ordinary policing. It's not the swing.
It feels like the same sort of universe, doesn't it? You almost feel like one character could have been in the other series just for a bit. And I like that sort of overall consistency, because you know how much I like to join series together and things like that. But yeah, Dixon, happy 69th birthday.
Yes, George. Getting a bit creaky now. Creakier.
Well, so am I. That's all right. That's allowed. So there we go. So thank you for listening to this episode.
Yes.
We hopefully we'll be back sooner rather than later.
Yes.
Not sure about a full issue yet, but I think we can probably
have an idea.
We have an idea for an In Conversation, I think. So that might be the next place we'll go. But thank you very much, and we'll hope to see you again soon.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
That was episode 67 of Round the Archives.
Starring Lisa Parker, Andrew Trowbridge, Michael Seeley, Warren Cummings, Paul Chandler and Toppie Smellie.
On the musical side, you heard Dan Tate and Paul Chandler.
Dixon of Dock Green was created by Ted Willis.
And the producers included Douglas Moody, Ronald Marsh and Joe Waters.
Everything I do, and I'm so glad she's here. My mother, the car.